Hello everyone, this is a quick lecture on citation. I'll just go over really quickly sort of what citation is, what we need to talk about and learn about for citation broadly, and then I'm going to discuss our citation style just a little bit. So you may be familiar with a particular citation style. Most students use MLA when they're in high school. We're not going to use MLA as a citation style, but I'm going to talk broadly about citation and why it's useful and broadly how it's done. And then I'm going to talk a little bit in specifics about our citation style, the one we're going to use in this class, okay? So the first thing to know is that citation is really just letting the audience know where outside ideas and information come from. So, anytime you bring in an idea or information from someone else, you have an obligation to let your audience know that that's not your idea, that's someone else's. And citation is what does that for you. It can be done well and it can be done poorly. Citation done well gives an audience a clear sense of where ideas come from. Citation done poorly, it makes it ambiguous. It's not really clear what's idea and that sort of thing. As I said, there are many different citation styles. Here are a few of the common ones in higher education. You have the Modern Language Association, or MLA, which is used primarily in English. You have the American Psychological Association, which is used, or APA, which is used in sociology, psychology, and some other sciences, or social sciences too. You have Chicago style, which is used in like some of the humanities like history and philosophy. So is Turabian, which is very similar to Chicago. Associated Press style is what's used in newspapers and magazines, sometimes called AP style. So yeah, these are some of the various styles that exist out there. But honestly, most publications have their own styles that they use, right? So there'll be like some version of AP style or some version of MLA or some version of APA, but they have more specific rules they want you to follow for citation. If you ever become a professional writer, what you'll learn is that like all the sort of tedious rules that places have are excruciating. But for example, the New York Times has its own style guide. It's close to AP style, but it's not the same, right? So that's how citation works, and it gets really complicated the more you get into it. But anyway, I'm going to talk broadly about citation a little bit. There are 5 important things to remember about citation, okay? The first is that citation allows your audience to distinguish between your ideas and someone else's. When I read through student writing, one of the things that sort of annoys me the most is when I can't tell the difference between what you came up with and what other people have said, right? I'm, as a reader, looking for your ideas, not someone else's ideas. I could just go read their stuff for that, right? So it helps you clearly distinguish between your ideas and someone else's. It also allows your audience to verify the accuracy and credibility of your information. So I can, if you cite your sources, I can go look at those sources and see whether or not I think they're credible or not. It also allows your audience to trace the conversation you're a part of. So if you're writing about, for example, athlete activism, right, and you cite sources from the past, they can then go see what those commentators have said, and the ones before them, and the ones before them. Your citations sort of represent a timeline for a conversation. So somebody can say, well, back in the 1960s, people thought of athlete activism differently than they do here in 2020, right? Because I've traced the conversation back, right? The fourth thing is that quality citation makes the author look much more credible. If you write a piece and there's just one citation in it, an audience looks at that and says, this guy or girl doesn't know that much at all about this topic because you don't have that many citations. So think about sort of how citations work and the number of them, how they work as a rhetorical feature too, right? They sort of show your audience, hey, I'm a credible person. Number 5, citation is a matter of respect for the people whose work you're using to make your own work. You're using to make your work, not making your work. It's just a respectful and ethical thing, right? It bothers me when people don't consider the ethics of what they're doing. And it's just unethical to take someone's ideas or work and pass it off as your own. So let's make sure that we're citing when necessary, okay? Now, there are sort of 2 elements of citation. or two things that people often talk about in terms of ways to do citation. There's in-text citation, and then there's a works cited page. Some styles don't use a works cited page, or they use footnotes or endnotes instead. Like Chicago and Turabian don't necessarily always have a works cited page. Sometimes they'll just do it in footnotes or endnotes. But you almost always see in-text citation. I can't think of a style that doesn't use them. But in-text citation is when you cite in the writing itself. So you attribute the author, or you give page numbers, or something like that, right? In-text citation and works cited pages often work together. So an in-text citation is meant to lead the audience to the works cited page so they can easily find the source they're looking for. So keep that in mind as we think about, like, well, what function do these two things even serve? Well, they do serve a function, though the citation style we're going to utilize does not have a works cited page. So for your large projects, you won't ever have to have a works cited page in this class, okay? Scholarly writing typically has both of these things. They have in-text citations, and they have a works cited page, or they have footnotes and endnotes that still have works cited entries in them. Non-scholarly writing typically just does all of its citation in text. Okay, and I'll show you an example of both of these things. If you look up here, this is a scholarly article from a sports sociology journal. It's about college athletes and how they experience their educations in college. Now you'll notice if we go through, they use APA style here, which has all these chain parenthetical citations in them, right? Anytime you see one of these parenthetical, meaning it uses parentheses, and there are a whole bunch of like names and dates, so Hanks and Eklund, 1976, Henshin and Fry, 1984, Michener, 1976, Shapiro, 1984, that's called a chain citation. And so everything up to this point, or really just some studies have cited a weak positive relationship between these things, blah, 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 blah. And these are those some studies, okay? And they do it again here. Most studies do this. And then they have a whole bunch more another chain citation with a whole bunch more of citations in there. So here you have sort of what's called parenthetical citation, right? And these names in here are supposed to lead you to the works cited page. So here you see the name Cross, 1973. So I know, okay, if I want to look up one of these studies that talks about lower GPAs or attrition rates or whatever, I can go down to Cross, 1973 in the works cited page. Adler, there it is, Cross, 1973. And this is a paper called The College Athlete in the Institution, right? That's how they're sort of meant to work together, okay? Now, this was all the rage back in printed times. This was written in 1985, before the internet was widely accessible, maybe before the internet altogether. Nowadays, especially in popular media, right, like newspapers, magazines, and so forth, or just websites, they don't do works cited pages. They'll just do links, right? So this is an article from 538.com about Mike Trout, called Mike Trout Finally Got an MVP level teammate, so why aren't the Angels winning? And you can just see in this very first paragraph, you see a whole bunch of links in here, right? So for years, the narrative around the Los Angeles Angels has been this: Mike Trout's good, teammates bad. If I click on this first link, it takes me to an article about how Mike Trout, actually it's a video, about how Mike Trout is good. If I click on the second link, it takes me to an article about how Mike Trout is bad, right? The rest of these are either links, or sometimes like this one, or this isn't really this is just additional information, almost like a footnote would normally be used, where they define a term that's in here, right? So if you don't know what wins above replacement are, you can click on this link and it'll take you to tell you what wins above replacement are, right? Click on this, takes you to another source, right? Now this guy wrote all these sources pretty much. See if we can find one he didn't write. That just takes you to somebody's stats page. So here's an outside source, a source that's not written by the same guy. But you see, they don't even do in-text citation where they attribute the author in this one. They just give you the links so you can go straight to that source if you want to. But the link itself tells you this information came from somewhere else, and you can go see it, right? Now, our style guide, which I'll share with all of you, sort of takes an in-between place. We don't do works cited pages, but I do have you put the author's name in the attribution, right? I also heavily encourage you to use links. Okay, so you need to read over this, but I'll just hit some of the highlights of it, of this style guide, right? All reference sources must be attributed, including quoted, paraphrased, and summarized text, videos, photos, and interviews. Okay? All references, sources, will be attributed using in-text citation and links. No works cited page will be necessary for the writing in this class. Okay? Just in-text citation. Does that make sense? And links. All reference sources that have a present. Oh, you'll notice I make a note here about your annotated bibliography. It's the one exception to this. You do have to do a citation entry for your annotated bibliography, so pay attention to that for that assignment specifically, but for your large projects, we won't be doing works cited pages. All reference sources that have a presence on the internet must include a link to the source. Exceptions include in-person interviews and maybe old primary documents like newspapers and magazines. So you might have, like, you might be able to find like a PDF maybe that you can't link because it's in some database that's behind a paywall or something, and you may not link that one, right? But if a reference source can't be linked, it's the author's responsibility to provide context for where the material comes from, including the publication and perhaps the date of publication. So here's an example. If I couldn't find a link, I might write like this. In a Washington Post story from 1971, Frank Robinson said, "I've spent all my life in a dugout. I'm not sure I know what the rest of the world looks like," something like that, right? And I'd want you to even be more specific than this, from September 7th, 1971. Right? So that way we know, hey, I can go look at the Washington Post from September 7th, 1971, and I can probably find that quote, right? Or, yeah. Here's some specific rules to follow when quoting. So make sure you're looking at that. It differentiates between quoting text versus quoting people, like if you've done an interview for some reason, and gives you a sense of how to do that. If paraphrasing, and we're going to go over all these things in your other lecture of introducing or incorporating sources. If summarizing, I also tell you how to work with things like numbers and money, which some style guides have different ways of dealing with things like numbers and money and percentages and things like that. So this is how I want you to handle numbers and money. Okay? All right, that's all I have for you for now. If you have any questions for all this, we'll go over it again. You can always ask me those questions. It's not an easy thing to do. Every time I've submitted an article for publication, I've had to have somebody correct me on citations and things. It's just a thing that happens. There's just too many rules and too many things to follow. So don't freak about it, but try and do as best as you can to follow our style guide. Okay? Thanks.